Hey,
There.
Alan,
How are you, Larry?
got audio there.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's get started. Let's give everybody an update where we are on the video and what we've been discussing, and then we'll send this out to everybody on our email list.
Great. Great. Well, I started actually writing the script for the video last night. And it'd be interesting. I'm interested to hear kind of what your process is for doing this kind of thing. For me, I like to sort of dive in and just research and learn as much as I can about individuals and topic and go down the rabbit holes, you know. And then once I feel like I've kind of got that bucket full of information, then I can start writing and start pulling things together. And so it kind of reached critical mass last night. I was able to look at the computer screen and go, you know what? I think I'm ready to go. Let's open up Final Draft, exterior, checkpoint Charlie, and get started on it.
Well,
So
for those who don't understand, screenwriting is a very different animal than any other kind of writing. You don't use really paragraphs. You have a limited amount of time. A page on a script is usually, not always, but usually a minute of film time.
right.
And so a typical back in the day, a typical script would be 120 pages max,
Yeah.
usually 80 pages. Today they're running way over 120 pages, and of course,
Well,
Oppenheimer was probably a Bible.
it depends on what you're doing. In my experience, when I started doing development 25 years ago, 120, yep, that was kind of the standard. And you know, when I'd be getting in a situation where I had like 10 screenplays to read in a day, first thing I would do is go to that last page. And if it was over 120, it went to the bottom of the stack, just simply because I didn't have time.
Yeah.
And so now when I'm writing a screenplay, I'm in my head, I'm thinking 90 pages and
Mm-hmm.
hoping I'm going to come in at 100.
Yep.
So it's really come down, and part of that films by and large, except for the great big, you know, blockbusters, just aren't as long as they used to be. Attention spans aren't as long as they used to be, and it costs more to make a film.
Sure.
So that's sort of the thinking on just overall, the bumpers on the side of the alley there, you know, that you're throwing your bowling ball down.
So when you write a script, you have to use a special script writing program called Final Draft, unless you're just absolutely a pro and you know exactly where to set all your margins and everything else. Final Draft does it all for you. And typically you will introduce people in a script in all capital letters. And generally speaking, you set a scene, but you want to be careful not to infringe on the director's flexibility and what the director sees, or the actor's flexibility and what they say. So you might want to say car approaching in desert, viewed by Bill at top of hill.
Yeah.
Car approaches rapidly kicking up dirt, or something like that, but leave it like that. Not a blue Chevy Nova comes at 64 miles an hour in the distance at about, 300 yards away, or whatever it is. I mean, you don't want to give too much detail, because again, your directors and your actors are going to have their own ideas of how to make that on scene.
Yeah. Yeah. As a
So
writer, as a screenwriter, the way I look at it is my job is to give a director and an actor the solid foundation that they can launch from, so that I can give them, because what we're doing is trying to create a visual of some kind, and a screenplay is really a roadmap. And and all of these things that the formatting, the way it's written, are these signposts to keep people on the map where you want them to go. Like you said, when you don't just write a character's name and then just go on. You write the character's name. You generally tell us a little bit about how old they are, and if there's a physical or other singular characteristic that a reader can keep in their mind, so that every time they come across that name, they have a visual and they can keep characters separate and distinct so that they can follow the story more readily. And so, so that capitalization, that's the first time you see them. Other signposts are every scene is designated, whether it's an interior, if it's shot inside, or if it's shot outside, and it has the location, exterior checkpoint Charlie, exterior, and then it also tells them whether it's daytime or nighttime. So that's called the slug line. That's above every scene, and then you'll generally have a quick 3 or 4 line description of either what's happening in the scene or where it's located. Again, just to create this sort of basic foundation to keep somebody in line and knowing where the story's going.
What I might compare this to is that the screenwriter's job is to build the whole frame of the house and
there
leave
you go.
all the rooms open, but say, we kind of want a pastel tone in this room. This is going to be a playroom, so and so and so, but it's up to the directors and the actors to really populate the room with the paint and with the paintings and anything else.
I rent space from my office companion here, Trigger, and sometimes he likes to get into the conversation here. So, yeah, and is it difficult for you, Larry, because you've got such a background in what we consider traditional writing? You're writing books and you're writing commentary and those kind of things regularly. How do you make that shift from that kind of writing to screenplays?
Well, my job actually is harder insofar as, because I know that that's my penchant, especially to write big books, I probably err on the side of not giving enough information for a scene, because I'm thinking, okay, does the director want to weigh in here? Is this something where I would expect the director or the actors to do something? And so, but I've seen screenplays where the explanation of a motivation, for example, is pretty long. It's almost like a paragraph long. And I probably wouldn't do that. So when we're talking about our project and Rockin' the Wall, and just to give everybody a heads up, we had originally thought about going with a pilot involving the Barbary Pirates. Now, so that everybody understands our roadmap here, we have to develop a 2 to 3 scene, 20-minute, maybe a little bit more, what we will call a torch video that we will then be able to present to the people at Angel Studios and a couple of others. But at Angel, they then show these torches to test audiences. I assume they send them out over the computer. Is that the way they do it?
Yeah, they have a portal that you can register on, and you can go in and then see all of these torches or proof of concept videos that creators like us are submitting because we'd like to partner with Angel. And then you can look at them and then you vote on them. And they have a matrix of questions and things that help them figure out how to move those stories and creators into their process, to eventually the goal being that Angel does a crowdfunding process campaign to raise the money to produce the series or the film. So that's the for what we're doing now.
Okay, and it's rare that they will actually bring in a whole crowd into a movie theater and show something like that in a theater, right? They don't do that.
They don't do that. It's all done via the portal. And so you'd watch it on your computer, that sort of thing.
Okay, so when we first started discussing this, and by the way, folks, when I first started working with my director, Mark Leaf, to do Rockin' the Wall, it was almost 1 year before we actually got to work, had an LLC, and started to do any filming. And in the course of that year, Mark and I talked hundreds and hundreds of times for hundreds and hundreds of hours about what the movie would look like, who would be involved, how we would approach it. And even then, after all of that, and a documentary is a little different. You don't produce a script first. You have to pretty much go from the questions you ask the participants and how they respond. So it's different than what we're doing with a feature film, where we say, here's the map, follow the map. With a documentary, the responses that you get begin to form the map as you go. Yeah. But nevertheless, we talked for about a year before we ever shot anything. And even then, once we started shooting, some of our assumptions didn't work out. And we said, no, we won't have the money to do this, or this is just not feasible, or we have a better way to shoot this, or whatever it was. So when maybe 2 or 3 months ago, we began to work on this, our plan was to use as a torch video a scene from Patriot's history involving Stephen Decatur and the Barbary Pirates. And the scene was that an American ship, the Philadelphia, one of our larger ships, had run aground in pursuing the Tripolitan pirates and was now itself a prize of war for the Barbary pirates. And they had come aboard, and they were trying without success to offload all the cannons and so forth so they could keep the cannons. And then they were going to try to get the Philadelphia off the sandbar and then make it into their own warship. Well, the rest of our squadron under Decatur arrived, and he determined that if we can't rescue this ship, we're going to burn it so that they don't get it. And in this very dramatic episode, I think it was about 20 sailors dressed as Tripolitans had gotten a hold of a Tripolitan skiff and were able to get right up next to the Philadelphia at nighttime and get aboard it and kill or jump overboard all of the Muslim guards that were on the ship, and then set fire to the Philadelphia and burn it so that the Tripolitans didn't get it. So our working tagline at that time was America's first naval victory was when we destroyed our own ship. But as we got into that for a torch video, 20 minutes, it just made no sense to try and build the sets that would be needed, which would really encompass 3 ships or parts of 3 ships. That was going to be cost prohibitive for the amount of time that we were going to have on screen. And so we looked for another torch that could serve as the pilot. Now, the pilot will be the first full 80 to 120 minute feature film that would come out of the torch video. It's not the final product, but it's the interim product that will then launch the series. And in essence, it will be a feature movie. And after much discussion, we arrived at, why don't we just do Rock on the Wall, but make it a dramatic feature film? Because the stories are great, they're uplifting, they're dramatic as all get out. Yeah. And the budget is very doable because it's more recent. You don't have a lot of costumes. You don't have huge sets to develop. In all ways, it proved to be a very good alternative to what we were going to do. So we settled on making an unnamed movie. For now, we'll call it Rock on the Wall as our feature film. And now we need to get two to three scenes out of that will be our torch video that we can take to Angel and other places and get investors to make the film. We don't know what the film's going to cost, but just a roundabout guess is somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 to $15 million, which I don't happen to have in my pocket right now. So we're going to have to get somebody else to help us or get investors, probably that will go way beyond Bilaria Coffe. And that's where that torch video comes in. So we then discussed what are the scenes we want to do in this torch video. And one of the key scenes in the whole movie was the band Mother's Finest, a mostly black band from Atlanta, Georgia, that was playing in East Berlin around the time the Berlin Wall fell. And they would actually be allowed inside East Berlin to play clubs for communist youths, to quote my cousin Vinny. And one of the great scenes was they were crossing Checkpoint Charlie, and the East German Stasi, the police, would come in with mirrors underneath the van and dogs to check out if you're smuggling people in or out. And then the colonel in charge of the checkpoint, or the lieutenant, whatever his rank was, I forget that, would come on. He came on board the bus and asked who the leader of the band was. And Glenn Murdoch kind of raised his hand and said, I guess I am. And he said, let's go to the back of the bus now. And Glenn, you didn't know if you were going to get shot by these guys or what. So Glenn goes back, and in an astounding moment, the guy pulls the curtain and he looks around. He says, shh, you don't tell anybody. And he opens his mini button jacket there and pulls out a Mother's Finest album, an old record album. And he says, you will sign. And he had them bring back all of the members of Mother's Finest to sign. So this was one of the dramatic moments that we thought we might capture. And so you were saying you're starting out, let's say, at Checkpoint Charlie. So then,
well, like
how would
you
you proceed?
It's a very dramatic moment. For those who aren't familiar with Checkpoint Charlie, it's on Friedrichstrasse in Berlin, and at the time it was a white. It looked kind of like a small mobile home trailer, white with a little peaked roof, American flag on it, and there's a big sign that says Allied Checkpoint Charlie. There would be military police there, and so if you were leaving West Berlin to go to East Berlin, you would drive past Checkpoint Charlie. The MPs would check your identification. But it was fairly rudimentary from the Allied side. But then after leaving Checkpoint Charlie, you'd see this big sign that says you are now leaving Allied territory. And ahead of you is this 50, 60-yard gap where then you start seeing concrete barricades where your vehicle would have to go through this S-shaped area between the concrete barricades, and then you would pull up to this outpost of the Stasi, like you said, and it was this big building. The wall proceeds down both sides away from it, barbed wire, razor wire, guards with dogs, guns. There are guard towers with soldiers with automatic weapons up there. And then you drive in, and they have you, in some places you drive across a big open pit. They get underneath your vehicle with the mirrors. So the setup is this very dramatic, very espionage-like scene where we set the tension so that, like you said, we don't know what's going to happen to these people. And they could just as easily be taken off the bus and shot, or taken off and put in prison. So they pull up, the guard is going to come on, and we'll have him. I think one of the things I'll do is I'll have him making loud sort of statements about the delinquents in this vehicle and the terrible, so that his underlings who are outside the bus can hear him, so that he can kind of continue on with his ruse. And then he'll go into the back, and I want people to think that our character, Doc Murdoch, is worried that he's going to get shot. And then that great moment of relief and humor when the soldier opens up his jacket and there is this Mother's Finest album.
Right.
And he just puts it down on the table and just puts the pen down with a hopeful look, but isn't really saying anything because he can't because he doesn't want to get caught either. So I think it's a wonderful tension build up, and then this great humorous relief that tells the story of the impact that rock and roll had there. And you'll find this interesting, Larry. Just earlier this week, I was at dinner with a good friend of mine who manages charitable rescue reliefs all over the world for a huge organization, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. in relief efforts everywhere across the world. And I was talking about this project a little bit, and it was very interesting because she recognized that importance of and the impact that rock and roll has had in bringing down these walls all around the world. She's seen that and experienced that in her relief work as well. So it is powerful. It's an unknown story that I think is going to be really, really fun for our audience.
So we will probably use that. There's another shorter scene that we plan to use to introduce everything. True story, where in Washington, D.C., under Ronald Reagan, there was a debate going on early in his presidency about Voice of America and Radio Free Europe. And these were different broadcasting networks that sent music and news and propaganda into the entire communist world. I don't think they reached as far as Moscow, I can't remember, but they did get through almost all of Eastern Europe. And typically, people who wanted an alternative to the state-run news service of Germany or Romania or Bulgaria or wherever it was would tune into Radio Free Europe. And so the goal of Radio Free Europe was obviously, as any broadcaster is to attract audience, number one, and number two, to give them our side of the story, our news. And so to attract the audience, they had been sending over everything from Frank Sinatra to classical music to
Louis Armstrong.
Louis Armstrong, who had been under Eisenhower a worldwide ambassador. People don't know that Eisenhower sent Louis Armstrong's band all around the world, and he did play inside the Soviet Union. And this is very important because here was a band that had a number of white musicians in it being led by a black man. And for many people around the world, this was totally contrary to what they had heard about the United States and discrimination, race relations there. It didn't tell the whole story, but it told a side of the story that they had never heard before. So here we are beaming in jazz and Sinatra and classical music. And the debate inside the Reagan administration, I'm surprised they even had this debate, was we need to be beaming rock and roll over because the kids are listening to rock and roll. This is how you get younger audiences. You don't get them with classical music. You don't even get them with Frank Sinatra. And about half of the staff, the management of Radio Free Europe, Voice of America, didn't want that. They saw it as degenerate music. We're fostering the worst habits of people, kind of the worst listening, the worst music. But about half of them said, no, this is exactly what we need to be sending over. And one of the people that I interviewed him in the movie was a legal counsel for Voice of America who was involved in all this. And it was a very heated dispute. They were yelling at each other over this. But finally, the side that says we need to beam in rock and roll music won. And that started to be sent in the early part of the Reagan administration, and immediately connected with young people. Another of our stories that we'll talk about is Leslie Mandoki. But Leslie and others would tell me how they would go to their radio sets and turn to the Voice of America channel, and they had headsets like this, and they would all kind of listen in or crowd around a radio to listen. And if there was a knock at the door, you feared it was the secret police, and you had to turn the knob back to the communist channel, shut off the radio, and put it back like nobody was doing anything. So it really was a threat to your life and your freedom. I recall one man said that it was Leslie actually who said that one day the teacher asked, how many of you heard the Beatles concert broadcast by the BBC, which was a very big deal, and several hands went up. And then that evening the secret police visited all those families. So you had immediate results from even listening to rock and roll. So we probably will have that little opening scene about this fight over rock and roll that will precede the one with Mother's Finest.
Yeah, and Larry, you bring up something that is just it's so interesting because we just don't appreciate here in the West what these things meant to people who were not free. And we hear, of course, the stories here in America from the 50s and 60s and Elvis and all of those kinds of things were this degenerate music that was turning children against their parents and children against the moral traditions and religious traditions of our past. And it kind of comes to a head with Tipper Gore in Congress talking about the impact of rap music and video games and those kinds of things. And so we see that part of the story and don't understand that in places where you couldn't do anything behind the Iron Curtain, that this became the symbol of their desire for freedom. And it was something for them that was worth dying for. I mean, look, I had to hide one of my buddy's Rolling Stone albums at my house because his parents didn't want them. So he was worried about getting a stern look from his folks. There were places where you'd be taken to prison, beaten, and you could die for listening to rock and roll music.
Yeah.
Because it represented that free thinking, that unwillingness to be subsumed by authority that was a threat. And if I'll just put the plug in for one of your books here. If your listeners haven't read your book, hang on, I'm going to get it. It's sitting by my computer where I'm working on the screenplay. They haven't read this. You got to read this chapter about that impact that music had over there. And as I'm starting to get into it and realizing how important it was, and not just for freedom, but for the spread of Christianity and the impact and influence of helping people understand that there is a higher power that cares about them and wants them to be able to choose to worship him. The impact was just, I don't think we even realize the full impact today. As we see the events that are happening today, there are young people in the Middle East, there are young people in Gaza who have listened to rock and roll music and want to be out from under the thumb of Hamas and Hezbollah. And there are, as Other Walls to Fall will detail, right now, there are young people in Iran who are secretly and at the risk of their own lives listening to this music. And that's the story we want to tell. I hope that when people get to see this film, they'll have a greater appreciation for what we have. And even if you don't like rock music, even if you don't like some of these performers and things, you'll at least appreciate the blessing you have of being able to choose not to listen to that stuff. Right. So it's really an important story, and that leads into the importance of Patriot's history. We've laid out 15 seasons worth of content that my hope and prayer is that demonstrate the beauty of this nation and what it represents, and the opportunity that it provides to us. You and I've talked about this before, but I was in Siberia. I was in Irkutsk when the wall came down, and so I got to see, front row that change happening. And that gave me a chance to appreciate the blessings of liberty from this great country. And so I hope that we can take your book, which is such an important book, and bring that to life in a way that people who don't fully appreciate that may watch it and go, oh, wait a minute, I need to rethink. Right. This really is an amazing place to live and to be.
Well, our path is a long one with many steps. And the first step is to finish a screenplay that will support the torch video. And at that point, we will begin in earnest fundraising to make the torch. And so that fundraising of the torch we might be able to do that with Coffee's. We might be able to do that on our own with our own crowdfunding. We'll see. It would just be about 20 minutes. And as I said, the sets aren't extensive. They're nothing like what we were talking about with the Barbary Pirates or a Civil War battle or something like that. After the torch, we then begin to shop the bigger concept of the movie itself, which for now we'll call Rock on the Wall, but it'll probably have a different title at that time. Yeah. And that's where we will begin to say, now, you want more of this, we need $15 million or whatever the amount is that we go through the next script. See, we'll have to have another script after this. Once we get the torch script written, we then will have to have a script for the whole movie. And that will determine how much the movie costs. Mark Leaf used to tell me I can make any movie for any amount of money. It's, it's good, fast, and cheap. Pick two of three.
Right.
And but in a sense, yes, you could make this movie for any amount of money, but you want to make it good. But you don't want to waste money. You don't want to have a $40 million budget for something you could make very well for $10 million. That would be an injustice to your investors.
When you think about those numbers, you've got to realize that if you do $40 million at the box office, well, the distributors take half of that right off the top. So now you're down to 20 million. And so that then has to account for your production costs. It has to account for your what they call P&A, your publicity and your advertising, all those ancillary costs. So even when you see those big box office numbers, it disappears very, very quickly. So you've got to be efficient, and there's nothing spends money like film production. I tell people, if you had two piles of money the same size and you pour gas on one and drop a match on it, that's about the burn rate for making a movie. It's the same.
Mark used to say, he used to have this joke, do you know how you make a small fortune in Hollywood? You start with a large fortune. Yeah. But anyway, our path forward is to complete the screenplay for the torch. Then we will begin to ascertain how much it will cost to make the torch, which we're hoping will come in somewhere under $60,000, but we don't know. Then so third step will be to fundraise for making the torch. And the fourth step will be to make the torch. Then we will go around to try to get the money to make the feature itself, and then to fundraise to make the feature itself, which we hope to have significant assistance from Angel Studios and the people who made Sound of Freedom and The Chosen and all that kind of thing. See if we can get them involved. If and when we can get the feature done, our vision is for that to serve as just the launching point for a whole series under the rubric Patriot's History. And from there, we would begin to look in 1 hour streaming videos at incredible array of stories in American history that would go all the way back to the Pilgrims and follow a single family throughout all of American history as they live, die, branch out, intermarry, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it's overwhelming. It's big. I mean, America's big. This country's history is, we will never quit telling its story.
And nobody has really tried to tell the whole history of America yet. We are the first to really try to undertake this. So
and that's an extraordinary point, because it's so important. We totally take for granted the impact of this nation, and not just this nation, but it's the principles that this nation was founded upon. We just take those for granted, and that story needs to be told.
So what we are going to do is to keep everybody out there appraised from time to time with these videos to let you know where we are in this process. And remember, if you have specific questions, you can write me at larry@wildworldofhistory.com, and I'll do my best to answer them. If not directly in an email, if I need Alan's help, we'll get together, and we'll try to do regular video updates as we go through. And of course, as we get into actually making and filming the movie, these are going to be really exciting, because you'll get to see little slices of us making the film. So in the meantime, keep those coffees rolling. We need your coffees to get to the next stage, which is the fundraising stage for making the pilot itself. There's a lot of cost in just writing the script for the Torch and just doing the line budget for the Torch, and then of course making the Torch video. So help us out, and we will see you in our next installment of making Patriot's history. Thanks, Alan.
You bet. Thanks, Larry.